All right. Still with where do we go from here? Chaos or community? Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. This is my favorite part of the book. It's the beginning of the book. This is when Dr. King took me to school. Okay, I was very harsh on the civil rights movement, not on the people who were activists during the time, but how it was represented post civil rights movement, as to where people today are saying that we received some benefit from this legislation, when it's been subsequently proven that we disproportionately did not receive benefit from it, and not even say that we substantially received benefit from it. The Lyndon B. Johnson held up the Civil Rights Bill to make sure that gender and sexual preference, for lack of a better term, was added to that bill, because they knew that there were more white women than there were blacks in the United States, and that they could funnel resources to white women by way of this, which is still keeping the wealth in their community. That's their daughters, their wives, their sisters, their mothers, their aunts. They knew that there was definitely a much larger Caucasian gay population than the black community, because it was more of them. Just, simple fact, more white people, there are going to be more gay people. So that was a savvy move to keep the wealth in the white community. And I was very harsh on the representation of the civil rights movement. Again, that is not to downplay the activists of the time, but to represent history in a celebratory way is not necessarily helpful. Because yes, what they did was valuable, but to misrepresent the outcome, it just doesn't help us moving forward today. But basically, to paraphrase this, Dr. King is saying, starting off with, okay, what happened? What happened? You want to know what happened? I'm going to tell you what happened. We did all of the nonviolent movement. We led this big march. The president comes out and says, we shall overcome. Lyndon B. Johnson. And what happened? We thought we won. We thought we knocked it out of the park. And he says, 1 year later, some people who had been brutalized in Selma, who were present at the Capitol ceremony, were still in slums. 1 year later, Negro leaders who had been present in Selma were no longer held offices in the organizations that got them the 64 and 65 bills. They had been discarded to symbolize the radical change of tactics within the black community. So a lot of the people who at that time that created movement were rejected. And that's something within the black community we don't teach and we don't talk about. And that's something that we need to know. A year later, white backlash happened. How many times have we seen that? White backlash. O.J. Simpson getting 33 years for coming into a room to get some stolen memorabilia of his. Nobody hurt. 33 years. That was white backlash from him being voted not guilty. White backlash of Donald Trump Every time white backlash, the lack of the demonstrations that you're seeing by the alt-right or whatever these groups are called in response to Black people saying Black lives simply matter, or the embittered response, all lives matter. And if all lives matter, why do you have a problem with Black lives mattering? Long story, we're not going to go into that, but that white backlash is consistent in our country. During the year, white and Negro civil rights workers had been murdered in several communities. The swift and easy acquittals followed. During the year, in several northern and western cities, most tragically in Watts, Negro uprising with violence. A year later, Rampant magazine was asserting after more than a decade of civil rights movement, the Black American in Harlem, Haynesville, Baltimore is worse off today than it was a year ago. He's saying, what happened? You know, had we fumbled the opportunities that we had? What happened? And he said, a simple explanation holds that the Negroes rioted in Watts. The voice of Black power was heard through the land, and the white backlash was born. The public became infuriated with sympathy, and sympathy evaporated. Black people got mad because they saw they had been had. White people got madder because they saw an attack on their opportunities being encroached upon. For the majority of white Americans, the past decade, which was the first phase of the civil rights movement, 2 phases, education for us. The first phase had been a struggle to treat the Negro with decency. That was the struggle, which is still the struggle today. Black lives matter. Forget the organization. I'm not talking about the organization. I'm talking about the statement. That's what's still a problem in our society. Not equality. And that's the problem strategically that our community had, that we came so low on the totem pole. And that was met with frustration. So white America readily demanded that the Negro should be spared the lash of brutality and coarse degradation, but it never truly committed to helping him out of poverty. Now you say, well, why should white people have to help Black people? I want you to read something. Look it up. Do your own research. The report of the National Advisory Commission on Civil Disorders. Summary and report. Now, this was brought about in 1967. The President of the United States asked that he established a commission directed to answer 3 basic questions. What happened, why it happened, and what can be done to prevent it from happening again. We're talking about the civil rights movement. Obviously, this is 1967. What happened? Why did this happen? And what can we do for this not to happen again? Well, at the end of this report, they found that the United States government systematically maintains and is responsible for the condition that exists within the black community, because this is specifically talking about civil rights, civil disorders. They're not talking about poverty overall. They're talking about poor black folk. They're talking about why are black folk upset and what can we do to not have this irritant again. And they told them, they said, our systems maintain this. Our housing systems maintain this. Our insurance systems maintain this. Our medical systems maintain this. Our cultural systems maintain this. Our economic systems maintain this. Our prison systems maintain this. Our education system maintains this. Our religions maintain this. This was in the Kerner Report. The Kerner Report got it right. In 1967, it is right along with the writing of this book. So this is what Dr. King is realizing. And he said that white Americans left the Negro on the ground in devastating numbers, walked away with the aggressor. It appeared that the white segregationist and the ordinary white citizen had more in common with each other than with the Negro. Now, that is where I think a truth lied that Dr. King just didn't, his heart would not allow him to, as a humanist, to absorb. Because that has historically proven to be the overwhelming fact. Unfortunate, but it's true. When the Negroes looked for the second phase, the realization of equality, which is the second phase, first was civility, second is equality. They found that many of their white allies had quietly disappeared. The Negroes of America had taken the president, the press, and the pulpit at their word. And when they spoke in broad terms of freedom and justice, and when black people found out that that wasn't true, that's when the Watts riots happened. That's when the Black Power movement happened. That's when the young black community, the young black educated community, turned away from the nonviolent concept to the Black Power concept, which he slowly begins to move in. But he corrects me in establishing the value of what was learned. So these things did not have to be repeated. And he gives us case by case. This is what we learned. This is what we learned. This is what we learned from doing the first phase. And if we have an understanding that the civil rights movement was designed to be in phases, we can speak about its accuracy, its success, in more accurate terms. And that is where this chapter continues. And we will pick that up. Right now, we're about on page 6. So now we're about to go into why this was still necessary and why it still was effective, which is what I needed to learn.